welcome everybody, and welcome particularly to Neil and Diane and Hamish and Victoria. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. Look, let's get straight into this and talk to Neil about what he's doing and what he's done, perhaps. When you think of the sort of the pantheon of great arts patrons and benefactors, you know, from Felton to Fairfax, from Potter to John Caldor, etc., people might be not so familiar with the name of Balnaves, but here we are, after 5 years with the Sculpture Prize, and now starting this wonderful new one, which you'll see upstairs, a three-program exhibition over 6 years. And something happened to suddenly turn Neil Balnaves from the great entrepreneur, you know, television maker, etc., to being one of the great philanthropists of Australia in medicine, in education, the arts. What was that epiphany? Let's just touch that, because then I want to talk about before the epiphany.
Right, the turning point was probably getting married and having a wife who influenced me.
It's nice to know that somebody influences you, anyway.
It's a byproduct of obviously being encouraged in something that I grew up never having the slightest interest in. Yeah. Medicine or the arts were a byproduct of living. Everyone else did that, but I didn't. And it was a bad accident I had 8 years ago that gave me a lot of time lying on my back, that gave me a lot of time to reflect, and that's where the idea of the foundation came from.
It's that sudden brush with mortality, isn't it, that suddenly does things to the mind and the brain and the imagination, isn't it, Neil?
It's a very good wake-up call.
Yeah.
Very good.
It's also a lesson about mucking about in boats. Be very careful. Boats can be dangerous things. Let's go back a bit. Because some time ago we were talking about Paul Hamlin, who was a huge mentor of yours, wasn't he?
Paul was the great mentor in my life, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
In publishing?
In publishing and in the fields of philanthropy, in the area of teaching a fairly young bloke as I was in those days it's more about the community you live in and what you can do. And it's not a matter of how much money, it's a matter of just what you do in the community you are involved with. And he was very much that. He said it, good deeds by great example. And that certainly rubbed off on me.
Do you ever go to that White House on the corner of Carlisle Square?
The White House on Carlisle Square?
On the corner where he lived?
Oh, yes. Sorry, yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to go there and look at the then madam, bought a 12th century Chinese Buddhist sculpture. Rather like the one we've got downstairs, but it's not the same one. And that's for the first time I went there, I remember. It was
very unusual house.
Probably about the same... When were you... When are we talking about your encounters with Hamlin?
One of my first jobs was working for Paul.
Yeah. When
I came to Sydney in 1968.
Yes.
That gives you a date of how old I am.
Yeah.
And I knew him then because I worked for him in setting up at the Hamlin Group in Australia.
Yeah.
So that's where I began.
And the publishing led into the telly, into Southern Star.
It was a bit of a realisation there that being in publishing was a nice business. It was certainly a gentleman's business. It didn't have the rough and tumble that the entertainment industry has, and I took the view you could never make much money in it.
In a polite, you can't make money in a polite business.
Well, it's very hard to. Publishing is probably one of the toughest games around.
I agree.
It is very hard on a market size of Australia to really make much of a business out of it. So I took the view that the entertainment industry was probably something I could do probably more successfully. And with 3 kids and a wife, it became important.
Diane, you're getting blamed for a lot tonight, including success. It's okay. But then the television business, which I suppose is the great generator of funds for you, and making all those programs, which became part of the absolute staple diet of Australian television, and then bringing us the absolute wonders of reality television. Here's the man who brought Gretel Killeen to the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Thanks a bunch, Neil. You did us proud.
So long as it wasn't Big Brother.
But tell us a bit about that, because it's, in a way, you know, that kind of real populist stuff is, I suppose, in some respects, the antithesis of what we are in some ways.
I think the market would rather remember me for documentary series like This Fabulous Century,
Yeah.
television dramas like Blue Heelers, Water Rats, and a lot of the dramas in the 70s and 80s. But without a doubt, Big Brother was one of the most extraordinary shows I ever saw when it was in the UK, and just really gobsmacked by its power in a community, its ability to open up horizons, its ability to be very criticised too. I mean, it was a program that I don't imagine too many people in this room could say that they were riveted to it, but it was certainly a topic of conversation. It was without doubt the largest audience show on television for about the best part of three to 5 years, and then only started to fade in its latter years. But it was definitely a window into the Australian psyche, how kids behaved, how it motivated people, how it demotivated people. But it was a slice of our life that I think has a lot to do with the start of reality television, and it did a lot of good. I am prepared to defend its criticisms, but at the end of the day, it did very little harm. It never broached the broadcasting standards in this country. It lived by the rule books. It was a program that its time came and its time went.
But did it start here? The whole idea...
No. So it was a show that started in England. It's based on... there's nothing new in this world is the thing you learn in the entertainment industry. I learned that from Bill Hanna-Barbera. All of those that can go back as old as I am, you'll probably all remember the Flintstones. Well, the Flintstones was the beginning of animation, but the Flintstones was purely a cartoon version of a show previously called The Honeymooners, with Art Carney and Jackie Gleason. There's nothing different. Almost the scripts were the same. And Big Brother was purely the film with Jim Carrey called, and I'm having a memory lapse here because of my senior years, The Truman Show.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, The Truman Show, if you saw the movie, well, Big Brother was nothing more or less
Is that the one Peter Weir did?
Show. Peter Weir did,
Yeah,
yes, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And then, anyway, moving on. So that was the background, the fortune. Sold the company, White Star, Southern Star, and had your epiphany and went and became one of Australia's great philanthropists, for which Neil was rightly acknowledged just earlier this year in the New Year's Honours List with his Order of Australia, and many congratulations, quite right too. And so let's get on to this now. Now, the Balnaves Foundation. Medicine, you help, I know, Joanna's Children's Hospital at Westmead. What else are you doing in that area?
Medicine, we've got a fairly focused brief. About half the grants go to medicine, and they're quite sizable grants. Yeah. The focus of medicine is, the underlying theme of the foundation is all about benefiting future generations of Australians. Yeah. I believe passionately in this country, obviously we all do. That's why we care about, all of us, I'm sure, arts and medicine, because if we build a healthy future generation in this country, we can really have a long-term view about not necessarily being the biggest country, we can be the cleverest country, and I care terribly much about doing that. So the medical side is all about research in areas where it's needed. We're a major provider of development grants for research in children's cancer, which has made great strides here in Sydney. We are the biggest funder of work on cerebral palsy. It's absolutely stunning to look at when you see cerebral palsy, which costs the community hundreds of millions of dollars a year in maintenance. Cerebral palsy touches most of our lives somewhere, sometime, and the federal government spends less than $1 million a year on research. It gets 1/500th the amount of money spent on cancer, yet it affects 3 times more children than cancer does.
That brings...
And that's scary.
Yeah, it does. It brings us to a point about the nature of philanthropy, about the function of philanthropy, and about the motives of philanthropy, which I wanted to touch on before we get on to art. A lot of the things that the Balnaves Foundation does in medicine and medical research and in education with Bonn University, etc., you could legitimately say, look, that's not a private foundation or a private individual's responsibility. It's a government responsibility. Is this this a manoeuvre really? Are you relieving the government of a responsibility? Or are you actually expanding or making it aware of a responsibility that it should assume?
I think the days are gone. I think really even my childhood, where the government was a substantial supporter of everything. I mean, you know, they built the roadways, they put in the infrastructure, we paid for it out of taxes. Look at today. You can't get a freeway built without tolling it. You can't. Private enterprise has got to step up to the plate. We as taxpayers are stepping up to the plate more and more, and the tangible evidence of what we do, I think, is getting less. So what's the result of that?
That does beg the question, where does the tax money go? And I think we know where it goes.
If I ever find out where it goes, I'll be rich. I mean, my view of it
goes to the bureaucracy. That's where it goes.
Well, we are feeding just a shocking bureaucracy of a size and proportion that's out of control in the size country we are, and basically soaking up the revenue raised by all of us in this room. I mean, we pay our taxes, we do our bit, and the money that goes around gets less. I mean, I would just like to see a government build a freeway again. I'd like to see a government be able to open broad acres again without having to hit the user a tremendous premium for having it. I mean, the day's gone. I mean, we have no airports. We certainly have no power stations. We have no freeways. We are going the way of being basically feeding a bureaucracy. If you take the amount of money that's spent on retirement benefits and all the other benefits to politicians, which we are just a terribly overcome country, I really resent it. But I can't do very much about it until you can take the view we might change the government, but we have more of the same. We don't get over that issue. So it's a little beef of mine, but, you know, I think if you give private philanthropy 1% of the money the government spends a year on Indigenous issues, I'll tell you what, we'd do a lot better with it without having to hire anybody than the government does. And I think it's a real tragedy that, you know, we talk about Guantanamo Bay in America and we go through this problem of saying, well, look how bad that is. We have it in the outback. We have it nearly as bad, and we are really making, or our governments are making a mess of the Indigenous issues to an extraordinary extent, and the answer is not throwing just more money at it and more money at it.
But that is one of the features of private philanthropy, such as the Balnaves Foundation, is that its funds go directly to the end user and to the end purpose and the end function. I mean, you for example, for every perhaps dollar that the government properly invests, it's probably spending $5 on looking after itself. You're probably spending 5 cents. But let's get back. Let's go on with the art now. 5 years ago, we started the Balnaves sculpture series, which was very innovative. Nothing like that had ever been done before, and it stemmed from your real interest that sculpture was, you know, an undervalued exercise in the arts in Australia, which you believe, and you helped the Sculpture by the Sea. Where did that come from? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, we all know that sculpture's the poor cousin, but I think there's a reason for that. But I'd like to hear your views about it.
My view about it was, I mean, my art side is very much influenced by my wife, who's got much better taste than I have. But I think we took the view that art, as we got to know more about it and travelled overseas more, the sculpture was a much larger form. It was much more visible. And I don't think it was because we had lesser quality sculptors at all. It was not accepted as an art form to the extent that, I mean, we had 4 or 5 great sculptors in the 60s, 70s and 80s, but we didn't have the 50 or 100 we may have today. And what was going on was it was getting swamped by the painting side of it, where there was much more of a culture of giving, collecting and exhibiting. And sculpture wasn't there like it was in New York or in London or Paris or Prague or whatever you'd go to, and you'd say to yourself, I mean, just go through the Vatican Museum, sculpture everywhere.
But I think there are reasons for that. Sculpture tends to have, historically, in the Western tradition, its origins rooted in the human figure, which has never been the dominant psyche in Australian art, you could argue. And it's had its origins in a role of iconography and ritual as well, which has been absent here, perhaps.
I think there are exceptions to that. McKennell.
Yeah, there are.
McKennell was great on the human form, but I think most of our sculptors in the 60s and 70s and 80s today are very abstract.
Yeah, exactly.
You're absolutely right there. But I think we are starting to cultivate our own style that's as strong as, say, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century sculptors. So
anyway,
I think
we started,
emerging is something special.
We started with that program. It ran for 5 years, and Wayne did the first of those shows, which was terrific. I remember it was upstairs, and it was a very colourful and quite an eye-opener to many people. I think you were quite enthused by that first stab, weren't you?
I think the extraordinary thing was, this is a credit to yourself, the gallery, and particularly Wayne as the curator, the thing that was, out of the 6 artists that were chosen, and I think it was 6, 5 of them became established worldwide within 5 years of that. And I had the same sort of emerging feeling when I had a look yesterday at the exhibition that I hope you're all going to see shortly, that suddenly you see something completely different from what we're used to seeing as art in Australia. It's very contemporary, it's very modern, but it reflects a new view of another emerging generation of Australia. It's so refreshing and so encouraging that as a community the size of that we are, we can actually give life to this, that we actually do have a real emerging culture that is quite different. It's not like going to any gallery in London, New York. It's ours. And boy, we are a rich country in that regard.
And I think that's one of the things that comes through. It came through very strongly in that first sculpture show. You know, Still Life it was called. It had Ricky Swallow and Michaela Dwyer and people like that. Very different artists who, as you said, you would never see anywhere else. And it's exactly the same with Wilderness upstairs. When you look around and see there's a kind of, there's an extraordinary sort of regenerative life in and a sense of originality too. And I think that's one of the things that you want to foster always, is the touching, the opening of the imagination to something new always. That's one of your deepest wishes in a way, isn't it?
My legacy, I hope, and carried through my children, will be that in a small way we will have opened the horizons. We will have expanded the view for all of us and in the next generation behind that, to the setting up of our own. We don't need to import a lot of our culture. I agree that from a teaching sense and other senses we need some of it. You've only got to look around the gallery. But some of our own is just as vibrant, just as important.
Yeah, one of the things that's always on our minds, and I think we've talked about this before, was the image of Australia and Australian art around the world, which I think perhaps is a rather limited vision at the moment. And you, having been in the media and in the industry, know all about trying to get a message across and trying to get an image across. I find that one of the things it's very frustrating in a way, trying to get the message and the image and the activity and the imagination of Australian art realised and recognised around the world.
Couldn't agree more.
You must have some ideas. How are we going to do this, Neil? Because
well,
we have a problem.
You look back at industries I've been in, there's no doubt about it. In publishing, we're right up there. Our authors sell well.
And music, too.
Our tradition of music is extraordinary. Our occasional ups and downs in the film industry. Our progress in television as a medium around the world. I mean, Australian television, I mean, you just turn on a channel anywhere in Europe these days and you'll see water rats, you'll see blue heelers and German, Dutch,
you'll get a rerun of Sylvania Waters, actually, that's what you'll get.
That's true. Australian Big
Reality
Brother won't
television,
go there.
no, you can't.
But to my mind, art is way more.
I know.
It's just way behind it.
It's an issue, and we talk about it in the building, and it's very strange. And of course, it's understandable in a way that Aboriginal painting has become the pennant for Australian art around the world, and that's fine, absolutely, because again, it's unique, it's distinctive, it's sort of exotic. But there's a lot of other things going on, such as the exhibition upstairs, where there's such a wonderful sense of energy and freshness. So we need people like you, Neil, to think about your foundation, about helping to promote Australian art around the world. I think it's one of the most valuable things we could do.
No, I think you're right on the button. I mean, we are the principal sponsor of the Australian exhibition at the Venice Biennale for one simple reason. That is putting Australian art on the map. But it's a small little stone in a very big pond. But that's something in the direction. Look at what John Cowdor did years back when he toured in an Australian exhibition around the world. And
yeah.
maybe we've got to start going back to those origins. Maybe we've got to go back to the days that Nolan and the others went to London and worked and became well known. But we've probably got to tour our art. We've got to get the cultural exchanges more than one direction. When it's coming in, it's coming in. We've got to get it going out, and it has to be acceptable. You can't tell.
I think you're a huge protagonist for Australian art, the Australian image around the world. I think that's absolutely fantastic. But one of the things that we do, I mean, we had this discussion because one of the shows that Neil and Diane and the foundation sponsored in that first series of sculpture shows was Wolfgang Lieb. And there was a question about here was a German artist bringing in, is that the right thing to do? But that kind of injection of imagination from around the world, like Tatsu Nishi outside that John did, those kind of things are essential ingredients to our life as well. Absolutely essential.
Look, I totally agree. I think, though, when you look at the amount of money other governments spend in subsidising exhibitions to come down here, you look at how little money there is to put Australian exhibitions overseas. You look at the governmental view about arts. I mean, we can't be the biggest economy in the world. We can't be the most aggressive industrial nation in the world. But we can be the clever nation of the world. And that is a lot to do with our art
with the image
being
of our creativity. I absolutely agree. And we've just had this very issue, as you know. And it's one of the things that I think grates with us enormously, that there's a huge presence on the tangible, but never a realization of the value of the image of the intangible that's transported in the intangible. Now, Neil, we've actually got to wind this up because there's something else happening. In your foundation, which does things for education, for medicine and the arts, it spreads itself across the creative, across the imaginations. And it was set up, you launched it in when? The actual foundation, 2006?
It was set up in 2006.
Mm-hmm. And I remember you put an enormous sum of money into it, like $27 million. You distribute $2 million every year, at least. You've built it up to $30 million already, in spite of having distributed all that money every year. And you're going to increase it to $50 million. This is your intention? Could you come and work for us, please?
I think I already am.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty fair comment. Thanks, Neil.